A woman from Australia departed from her residence and vanished without a single clue, leaving her spouse and 2 kids behind. Her relatives made numerous efforts to reach out to her, but when all their attempts failed, they sought assistance from the authorities. Following an inquiry, it was determined that the woman was not at risk and had the autonomy to determine her own destiny. Subsequently, she did not make any contact with her family, and it was only after 40 years that they discovered the astonishing truth. Lynette Joy Dawson was born on May 5, 1948, in the Australian state of New South Wales. She was raised in a warm and affectionate family environment alongside her 2 brothers and a sister. The Dawson family resided in Clovelly, a charming suburb of Sydney. Lynette was known for her cheerful demeanor, strong friendships, and her unwavering dedication to her loved ones. Recognizing her potential, her parents enrolled her in Sydney Girls High School. This decision was made with Lynette's best interests at heart. The school frequently organized joint events with Sydney Boys High School, where Lynette crossed paths with a young man named Chris Dawson in 1965. At the age of 16, they started a relationship. Upon completing her education, Lynette made the noble decision to embark on a career in the field of medicine, driven by her desire to assist those in need. Opting to become a nurse, she also took on a part-time role at a child care facility. At the tender age of 21, Lynette and Chris exchanged vows in the year 1970. The newlyweds relocated to the charming northern suburb of Sydney known as Bayview, where Lynette secured a position at a local hospital. Meanwhile, Chris delved into the world of professional rugby, showcasing his athletic prowess since 1972. Alongside his twin brother Paul, the duo eventually transitioned to become physical education coaches at a prestigious Sydney school. Despite their aspirations for a large family, Lynette and Chris faced challenges with conception. After years of unsuccessful efforts, they contemplated adoption before Lynette miraculously conceived, welcoming their first daughter followed by a second. Their joy knew no bounds. Regrettably, cracks began to surface in their seemingly perfect family life. Lynette's friends noticed unexplained bruises and injuries on her, though she dismissed their concerns. Domestic violence, a taboo subject at the time, was not viewed as a grave offense by many in Australian society. Chris, perceived as a devoted husband and doting father, was shielded from suspicion. Their friends, reluctant to intervene, hoped for resolution within the couple's relationship. Alas, the situation between Lynette and Chris only worsened with time. Lynette observed a change in her husband's behavior towards her, causing her to worry about the future of their family. After the birth of their daughters, they hired a nanny. Chris recommended one of his 15-year-old students, Bev McNally, for the job, but she didn't stay long after witnessing Chris raising his hand to Lynette. Another student, Joanne Curtis, took over the role. When Joanne faced family issues, Chris suggested she stay with them temporarily to care for the children. Despite Lynette's reservations, Joanne moved in with them in October 1981. Unfortunately, Lynette later discovered that Chris was having an affair with Joanne, leading to a devastating blow to their marriage. Despite this, Lynette chose to stay with Chris for the sake of their children, showing her unwavering love and commitment. Shortly after, on December 3, 1981, Lynette was faced with another unexpected turn of events. Chris left a note informing her of his decision to leave the family, expressing his intention to relocate to a different city with Joanne. He requested Lynette not to speak ill of him to their children. Despite feeling devastated by this news, Lynette was taken aback a few days later when Chris returned home. Joanne had a change of heart about moving and asked to reconcile. On New Year's Eve, Chris spent time with Joanne, leaving Lynette alone with the children. Joanne moved into Chris's brother's house on the same street. Despite the challenges, Lynette was determined to keep their family intact and decided to seek family therapy. Although Chris initially opposed the idea, Lynette managed to persuade him. Following New Year's, she promptly visited the therapist, and it appeared that the therapy had a positive impact on their relationship. Chris began to invest more time in his marriage and demonstrated a willingness to mend their issues. By January 8, 1982, Lynette updated her mother on the progress of the family therapy, and they arranged to meet at the local beach the next day with other relatives. Her mother noticed a slight slurring in Lynette's speech, suspecting that she might have been under the influence of alcohol. Lynette clarified that Chris had prepared a drink for her. The following day, Lynette's relatives eagerly awaited her arrival at the beach, but to their dismay, she never made an appearance. Concerned, they reached out to her at home, only to be informed by Chris that he had dropped his wife off at the bus stop earlier that morning. Lynette had mentioned she was heading to the store to return ill-fitting clothes. However, as the day progressed, Lynette failed to return home, causing her family to grow increasingly anxious. Come evening, Chris contacted Lynette's mother, revealing that his wife had reached out to him via phone. She explained that due to marital issues, she needed some time away to clear her mind. This news struck her relatives as peculiar, given the long-standing problems between Lynette and Chris. Despite this, they couldn't fathom Lynette leaving her beloved daughters behind. Her children were her world, and she had never hinted at such a drastic decision. Days turned into weeks with no word from Lynette, intensifying her family's worry. On January 12th, Chris claimed Lynette had called their home phone, reassuring him of her safety. He mentioned subsequent conversations and her use of the bank card. Nevertheless, doubts lingered among her loved ones. Lynette couldn't drive and had left without essentials for survival. She even abandoned emergency cash she had stashed away. 3 weeks later, Lynette's eldest daughter began school, a milestone her mother missed. This absence only deepened the family's apprehension. They were convinced something terrible had befallen her, despite Chris's insistence that she remained in contact. The last call from Lynette came at the end of January, after which she vanished. Finally, on February 18th, 6 weeks post-departure, Chris sought help from the authorities. He submitted a report about a missing person and voiced his concerns that Lynette might have joined a religious group or a cult amidst the issues in their marriage. Despite her family's denial of such a possibility, stating that Lynette was not religious and did not attend church, the police initiated a search with no leads. Lynette's mother and other family members were convinced that she would never leave her daughters behind, suspecting that she had been kidnapped or faced some other tragedy. However, the police concluded that Lynette had left home due to lack of evidence to the contrary. Despite efforts to locate her, the investigation was eventually halted. Chris placed a heartfelt message in the local newspaper, urging Lynette to return home, expressing his love and anticipation of her call. He reached out to all her friends in hopes of uncovering any information about her whereabouts. Despite Chris's determination to find Lynette, he divorced her a year after her disappearance and married Joanne Curtis the following year, who had moved in with him shortly after Lynette went missing. Joanne became the stepmother of Lynette's daughters, and to shield the children from the truth about their mother's disappearance, Chris informed them that Joanne was their biological mother. Lynette's relatives were displeased with the situation, but felt powerless to intervene. They decided to no longer rely on the police, having ceased their investigation long ago due to the lack of leads. Additionally, they made no effort to question her relatives and friends, resulting in the case being quickly abandoned without a thorough investigation. Chris and Joanne relocated to Queensland with their children, selling their previous home. Chris distanced himself from his ex-wife's family, only sporadically contacting her mother. Eventually, Chris and Joanne welcomed a daughter. 6 years went by without any contact from Lynette. This changed in 1990 when an unexpected event occurred. Chris and Joanne divorced, prompting Joanne to reach out to Lynette's family with shocking news. She revealed her suspicions that Chris had murdered his ex-wife. According to Joanne, Chris had mentioned hiring a hitman to eliminate Lynette a month before she vanished. On the day of her disappearance, he informed Joanne that Lynette had left for good. Joanne also urged the authorities to search the backyard of the couple's former residence. In 1991, Chris was questioned by the police. He denied any involvement in Lynette's disappearance, claiming that his ex-wife was attempting to defame him in order to gain custody of their daughter post-divorce. As the custody battle was ongoing, Joanne's allegations against Chris could have worked in her favor. Despite seizing phones from Chris and his brother, investigators found nothing incriminating, leading them to once again close the case due to doubts surrounding Joanne's claims. The case lay dormant for another 9 years until 2000, when the authorities decided to excavate the backyard of Chris's previous home. However, due to limited funds, they only dug around the pool area, a location suggested by the current homeowners during police interviews. According to their account, Chris persistently inquired during the sale if any changes were planned for the location. The only item discovered by the police was a torn pink cardigan. Although investigators believed it could have belonged to Lynette and contained evidence, DNA analysis did not yield any matches with her. A year later, the case was revisited, and the deputy state prosecutor concluded that Lynette was killed by an acquaintance. Despite resuming the investigation and questioning her friends and relatives, the police were unable to uncover any leads. It was only in 2003, 2 years later, that investigators publicly named Chris as a suspect. While they sought to charge him with murder, the lack of evidence prevented this from happening. Although the man could not be convicted, numerous witnesses reported that Chris and his brother were involved in inappropriate relationships with their students. However, no charges were filed in this regard, leading to the case once again coming to a standstill. In 2006, Chris claimed to have seen his wife among the extras of a series filmed in England, but no evidence could be found to support his claim. In 2010, the police announced a $100,000 reward for information on Lynette's disappearance, which was later doubled 4 years later. Despite numerous appeals, no reliable leads were uncovered, as individuals often fabricate information in hopes of receiving the monetary reward. In 2015, the police excavated a portion of Chris's former residence in an attempt to locate his wife's body, but their efforts were in vain. The case took a significant turn in 2018 with the release of a podcast on Lynette's disappearance, which garnered widespread attention in Australia and presented arguments implicating her husband in her murder. The podcast garnered the attention of millions of listeners, sparking widespread public outrage. Australians accused the police of negligence and called for the perpetrator to be held accountable. Hadley Thomas, the podcast author, reached out to Lynette's family in an effort to uncover new leads. Despite the lack of new evidence against Chris, the public outcry prompted a fresh investigation. Subsequently, on December 5th of that year, detectives arrested Chris for the first time on murder charges. He maintained his innocence and was released on bail pending trial. The legal proceedings stretched over several years. In 2019, Chris appeared in court and asserted his innocence, arguing that the trial should have commenced in 2020, but his lawyers consistently delayed the process. They contended that the extensive media coverage had biased public opinion against their client and thus demanded a trial without a jury, presided over by a judge. In May 2022, this request was granted, and the trial finally commenced. Chris's legal team maintained that there was no concrete evidence against him and that all charges were rooted in societal bias stemming from the podcast. They claimed that the author's presentation had swayed public opinion against Chris, leading to an unfair assessment of the situation. In spite of the absence of direct proof on the side of the prosecution, they constructed their argument based on a plethora of indirect elements. Family members and acquaintances of Lynette, who had frequently observed signs of mistreatment on her body, gave testimony in court, and Lynette herself had confessed to them that Chris was to blame. Their neighbors, who had witnessed the man assaulting her, also testified in court. They recounted that the day before Lynette vanished, upon her return to family therapy, she bore bruises on her neck. One of the crucial witnesses was Joanne, who disclosed that as she matured, she recognized how toxic her relationship with Chris had become. He fixated on her when she was just 15 years old. He would leave notes in her school bag and ask her out on dates. He was relentless and did not accept rejection, leaving the young woman feeling trapped. According to Joanne, Chris had complete control over her life. He dictated what she wore, who she spoke to, and what she did. He monitored her every move and could not tolerate any deviation from his plans. Consequently, the woman concluded that the man could have easily murdered his wife. The prosecution argued that Chris had desired to end the marriage for a long time, but feared losing part of his assets and custody of the children in a divorce, prompting him to kill Lynette and stage her disappearance. Furthermore, he wanted to eliminate her so she would not disrupt his relationship with Joanne. Conversely, Chris's attorneys maintained that Joanne had fabricated all of this to defame her ex-husband deliberately. They also presented several witnesses who claimed to have seen Lynette years after she went missing. These testimonies formed the cornerstone of the defense, yet lacked any supporting evidence. The prosecution contended that these testimonies were simply concocted and that if Lynette were still alive, she would have reached out to her relatives and daughters over the years. The alleged phone calls that Chris supposedly received during the first month of her disappearance could not be substantiated by any evidence. The prosecution contended that the woman was already deceased at that time, and the man fabricated the calls to reassure Lynette's family that she was safe. According to their perspective, Chris murdered the woman on January 9th, disposed of her body in an undisclosed location, and concealed it. Due to the police's negligence in their duties during those years, a thorough investigation was not conducted, despite the killer's apparent motives. The trial spanned 10 weeks, and on August 30th, 2022, Chris was found guilty by the judge. Several months later, in early December, the sentence was pronounced: 24 years in prison with the option of seeking early release after 18 years of incarceration. Given that he will be 92 years old by then, Chris may not live to see that time. Following the sentencing, Lynette's relatives, including her eldest daughter, addressed the court. She no longer harbored any doubts that her father had murdered her mother and expressed how his actions had shattered her life. She implored her father to disclose the whereabouts of Lynette's body so the family could finally lay her to rest. However, Chris remained silent and gazed at the floor as his daughter spoke. Despite the passage of almost 41 years since Lynette's murder, her family still clings to hope of locating her remains. Chris, now 74 years old, maintains his innocence, but even his own children do not believe him. Consequently, one of Australia's most notorious cases was largely resolved due to a podcast that captured the attention of millions, shedding light on this tragic narrative. Had the police conducted a thorough investigation from the outset, the perpetrator could have been brought to justice immediately after the crime, rather than after 4 decades. The 4th of July is a significant holiday in America, where people come together for parades, picnics with friends, and firework displays. Families use this weekend to reunite, play games, and have barbecues in the summer weather. Unfortunately, Mark Dribbin's family experienced a different outcome in 1999 when he didn't show up, and his disappearance remains a mystery to this day. Now, after 23 years, a surprising development may provide closure to his grieving family. Portland, Oregon stands as the grandest city in the state, acting as a central hub for the Pacific Northwest. In the year 2020, Portland claimed the 25th spot among the most densely populated cities, boasting a populace of 650,000 individuals. One could argue that Portland is a haven for the trend-setting hipsters, celebrated for its forward-thinking nature and dedication to individuality. The city is a haven for innovative minds and a prime spot for budding enterprises. Portland is renowned for its commitment to sustainability, with a plethora of craft breweries and cozy coffee shops dotting its landscape. It is truly a place of endless possibilities. The Dribbin family must have been gripped with unimaginable dread when their cherished son and brother, Mark Dribbin, failed to show up for the family holiday festivities in the summer of 1999. With no word from Mark and his unexplained absence from work, his loved ones and companions were left in a state of escalating worry. It was quickly determined that Mark Dribbin was last spotted on July 3rd, enjoying a drink at a local establishment known as the Eagle Tavern. A dedicated 42-year-old worker at Portland International Airport, Mark Dribbin was recognized for his strong work ethic and reliability. Serving as a cargo employee for United Airlines at the time of his disappearance, not much was known about his early years, except for his close bond with his brother and father. His absence during the 4th of July weekend caused great distress among his loved ones, as it contradicted his usual responsible nature. His sudden disappearance without a word was highly unusual, as he was known to always communicate his whereabouts. Concerned by the lack of contact from Mark, his family grew anxious and requested authorities to check on his well-being at his home. To their shock, the authorities found a disturbing scene at Mark Dribbin's residence. He was nowhere to be found, and the presence of significant forensic evidence suggested a violent incident had taken place. The sight of blood spatter on the walls and floors, along with signs of attempted cleanup, left a chilling impression on those present. This grim discovery heightened the fears of his family and friends, leading them to believe that he had fallen victim to a terrible crime. However, this was just the beginning of the unfolding mystery. Investigators uncovered another disturbing revelation. His car was discovered abandoned near Southeast 43rd Avenue and Division Street in Portland. This recent development did little to ease the concerns of Mark Dribbin's family and friends. According to the police's findings, it was theorized that the individual who harmed Mark in his home took his car and left it on the street, where it was later found by investigators. Despite being reported missing on July 6, 1999, Dribbin had actually called in sick to work 4 days earlier, citing a personal emergency without specifying further details. The reason for his absence from work remains unknown. The fact that his body has never been located leaves much to be desired. He was officially declared deceased in 2002, 3 years after his disappearance. Despite his family's relentless pursuit of answers, the case remained unsolved for 20 years. Numerous theories have emerged regarding Mark Dribbin's disappearance, including his involvement in the LGBTQ+ community and frequent visits to gay bars in Portland. His last sighting was at the Eagle Tavern, a popular gay bar in downtown Portland, leading the police to speculate about a potential encounter gone awry or a violent relationship issue with an unidentified partner. However, none of these theories have provided a definitive answer to the question, where was Mark? In the year 2019, 2 decades after the mysterious disappearance of Mark Dribbin, DNA from unsolved cases was undergoing retesting. Bode Technology, a prestigious private genealogy firm, was commissioned to conduct the DNA analysis. The advancements in genetic testing and ancestry mapping have been remarkable, surpassing the technology of a mere 10 years ago. The DNA samples recovered from both Mark's vehicle and residence were undergoing re-examination and cross-referencing with existing databases to identify a potential match. The progress in the field of science and technology is undeniably captivating. The tools available today, initially intended for tracing family lineage, have not only revealed our origins, but have also played a crucial role in resolving numerous cold cases, including that of the notorious Golden State Killer. Although no immediate breakthrough occurred, the DNA was submitted for ancestral mapping. As per official records, the test yielded a promising lead. One of the 3 brothers from a family in Portland was identified as a likely suspect. Following the elimination of one brother as a suspect, the focus shifted to the remaining siblings, Jesse and Christopher Lovrian. Genealogy and family history research have proven instrumental in cracking several cases over the past decade, and once again, they delivered results. A definitive match was established, pointing towards one of the brothers, a 53-year-old metal fabricator residing in southeast Portland. The individual in question was Christopher Lovrian. He cooperated with investigators and agreed to meet them to address their suspicions. Christopher rendezvoused with the authorities at a local establishment known as the Horse Brass Pub, where he vehemently denied any involvement in Mark Dribbin's disappearance. It is worth noting the choice of a casual meeting spot by the authorities, possibly to put Christopher at ease. Christopher Lovrian maintained his innocence regarding the case of Mark Dribbin. He, however, was unabashedly forthcoming about his criminal endeavors, confessing to deep involvement in illicit substances like methamphetamine and a string of grand theft auto incidents during the 90s. Despite his candidness about his other transgressions, he vehemently denied any connection to Mark or his disappearance. Despite his claims of innocence, Christopher Lovrian was hesitant to provide a DNA sample to the investigators for exoneration. This raised a glaring red flag. With unwavering determination for justice, a team of undercover officers at the upscale bar managed to discreetly collect the glass from which he drank, yielding enough DNA material for further testing. It was a stroke of genius on the part of these officers, as they were finally on the brink of closure. The test results unveiled a positive match. The DNA discovered in Mark Dribbin's residence and vehicle belonged to Christopher Lovrian. The authorities had at last secured a definitive match and a prime suspect in a 2-decade-old cold case. While this confirmed Lovrian's presence in both Mark Dribbin's car and home, the mystery of his disappearance lingered. Where was Mark Dribbin, and was Christopher Lovrian involved in his disappearance? On the 30th of April in 2020, amidst the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Multnomah County Grand Jury indicted Christopher Lovrian for the homicide of Mark Dribbin, leading to the issuance of an arrest warrant. Lovrian was apprehended by authorities 4 days after the warrant was released. A search warrant executed at Lovrian's abode uncovered 6 firearms, including 2 9mm pistols, 1.40 caliber pistol, a .357 revolver, and 2.22 rifles. Christopher Lovrian faced charges of 2 counts of second-degree murder, 1 count of abuse of a corpse, and 6 counts of firearm possession. It was discovered that at the time of Mark's disappearance, Christopher coincidentally resided just a block away from where Mark Dribbin's deserted vehicle was discovered in the parking lot. It was later revealed by the cold case investigators that during the cleaning of Mark's luxurious estate before its sale, a crucial piece of evidence was discovered. A handwritten note containing the contact details of Christopher Lovrian was found by Dribbin's father. This seemingly insignificant detail, overlooked at the time, could have potentially led the authorities straight to the perpetrator. The revelation of this information years later must have been an incredibly bitter pill to swallow. Just envision the anguish and frustration that must have consumed the grieving family. Following Christopher Lovrian's apprehension, he initiated numerous suspicious calls to his brother Jesse from jail. These calls raised red flags, prompting the police to delve deeper into the investigation. Upon searching a shed on Lovrian's property, investigators made a chilling discovery: a container containing the remains of a dismembered body. The decomposed body was identified as Kenneth Griffin, who had vanished just 2 months prior to Lovrian's arrest. An autopsy confirmed that Griffin had succumbed to fatal head injuries. Lovrian pleaded not guilty to all charges in Multnomah County Court. During the trial, Lovrian testified before the grand jury, recounting his encounter with the victim, Kenneth Griffin, at the 82nd Street Tavern. He claimed to have taken Griffin home, where they indulged in marijuana and ordered a pizza. Lovrian alleged that Griffin absconded with his credit card, sparking a heated argument that turned violent. Lovrian confessed to shooting Griffin multiple times with a crossbow in the neck and face before using an axe to end his life. He left the body to decompose for 3 days before dismembering it and concealing the remains in boxes within the shed. Although Mark Dribbin's body remains missing, DNA evidence firmly places Christopher Lovrian at the scene where Mark was presumably abducted. It is disconcerting to learn that Christopher Lovrian is accused of murdering and dismembering Kenneth Griffin before becoming a suspect in Mark Dribbin's disappearance. The discovery of Griffin's body in Lovrian's shed only adds to the suspicion. Investigators have reason to believe that Lovrian may have had other victims between 1999 and 2020, although none have been identified. The families of Dribbin and Griffin have asked for privacy during this difficult time. The District Attorney's Office of Multnomah County has urged the media to respect the families' privacy as they cope with these shocking revelations. While charges have been filed, Lovrian is presumed innocent until proven guilty. After a long trial on April 26, 2024, Christopher Lovrian was sentenced to life in prison after 46 years served for the murder of Mark Dribbin and Kenneth Griffin. Lovrian's attorney has chosen not to comment on the ongoing investigation. Authorities are seeking the public's help in determining if there are more victims connected to Lovrian.